John Kennedy disguises himself as homeless to test a bank. You won't believe what happens at the end. John Kennedy, the U.S. Senator from Louisiana, a man renowned for his sharp intellect and steadfast principles, shuffled down the palm-lined avenues of Beverly Hills, disguised as a homeless man. The afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the city, where wealth and glamour were woven into its very essence. Sleek Bentleys and Lamborghinis gleamed along pristine sidewalks, their polished surfaces reflecting a world where luxury was not just a lifestyle, but a way of life. Kennedy's shoes were worn, the soles nearly gone. His pants were frayed at the edges, patched and faded, and his threadbare jacket hung loosely on his wiry frame, stained with the wear of countless days. Yet beneath this disheveled exterior, there was a quiet confidence in his step, a subtle strength that seemed to defy the judgment of the world around him. He had meticulously crafted his appearance, a scruffy beard, a faded baseball cap pulled low over his brow, and clothes that looked like they'd seen better decades. His mission was bold, yet simple, to step into the shoes of those society often ignored, and test the humanity of one of Beverly Hills' most prestigious institutions, First Summit Bank. As he approached the bank's gleaming glass facade, its reflective surface catching the brilliance of the California sun, Kennedy felt a surge of anticipation. His heart beat steadily, driven not by fear, but by a deep curiosity to uncover the truth hidden beneath the polished veneer of wealth. Inside the bank's interior was a monument to extravagance. Polished marble floors stretched like a glassy sea, and vaulted ceilings adorned with intricate designs spoke of the institution's grandeur. Clients in tailored suits and designer dresses lounged in plush leather chairs, sipping complimentary espresso as sharply dressed bankers attended to their every need. The air hummed with the quiet confidence of wealth, soft conversations, the clink of gold watches, the rustle of crisp documents. But the moment Kennedy stepped through the glass doors, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations faltered. Eyes darted his way, some curious others laced with disdain. A few clients exchanged hushed whispers, their words inaudible, but their meaning clear. Kennedy felt the weight of their judgment, the unspoken assumptions about his worth or lack thereof. Yet he remained composed, his focus razor-sharp, his purpose unwavering. He approached the reception desk where a woman in her 40s stood, her perfectly styled hair and crisp blazer, a stark contrast to his ragged appearance. Her name tag read Marilyn, and her expression, though professional, barely masked her contempt. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice flat, her eyes scanning him from head to toe as if assessing his inadequacy. "Yes?" Kennedy replied, his tone calm but deliberate. His southern drawl softened to blend into his disguise. "I'd like to open a basic checking account." Marilyn blinked clearly, taken aback by the request. For a moment, her polished facade slipped, revealing a flicker of surprise before she recovered with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Our minimum deposit for opening an account is $500, she said, enunciating each word as though speaking to someone who might struggle to comprehend. "Do you have the necessary funds with you today?" Kennedy reached into his pocket, his movements slow and intentional, and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. He smoothed it out on the counter, the faded currency looking almost absurd against the gleaming marble. "I have this," he said simply, meeting her gaze without flinching. Marilyn's lips twitched, a condescending laugh escaping before she could stifle it. "I'm afraid that won't be enough," she said, her tone dripping with dismissal. "Perhaps you should try a different institution, one more suited to your circumstances." The words landed sharply, not because they surprised Kennedy, he had anticipated this, but because of how effortlessly they were delivered, as though rejecting someone like him was routine. Around the room, the bank's quiet hum continued, but Kennedy noticed the smirks and glances from other staff and clients. A man in a pinstripe suit muttered something to his companion, who chuckled softly. A young banker at a nearby desk averted his eyes, pretending to focus on his computer. The air was thick with judgment, and Kennedy felt a quiet sorrow, not for himself, but for the countless others who faced this kind of treatment daily. His eyes scanned the room, landing on a young woman seated at a desk near the back. She couldn't have been older than her mid-20s, her name tag reading Clara. Unlike the others, her expression wasn't one of disdain. Her eyes held a mix of curiosity and unease, as though she were grappling with an internal struggle. Kennedy noted her face, sensing a spark of humanity in a place that seemed to have forgotten it. Marilyn's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Sir," she said, her tone sharper now, "if you don't have the required funds, I'll have to ask you to leave." She pressed a button on her desk, and a security guard approached, his posture imposing, but his expression neutral. "Is there a problem here?" The guard asked, his voice firm but not hostile. Kennedy shook his head, his mind racing. He had come to test the boundaries of perception, to see how a place like First Summit Bank treated those who didn't fit its mold of wealth and privilege. The results were disheartening, but not unexpected. "No problem," he said quietly, turning toward the door. But before he left, he cast one last glance at Clara. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment, and in that brief exchange he saw something, perhaps an apology, perhaps a flicker of defiance. It was enough to spark a glimmer of hope. Outside, the sun blazed on, but Kennedy's thoughts were stormy. The world he navigated as a senator, a world of influence and respect, felt distant from the reality he had just experienced. His experiment had only begun, but it was already exposing the stark divide between privilege and exclusion. He settled on a park bench across the street, watching the bank's glass doors swing open and shut as clients came and went, their polished appearances a sharp contrast to his tattered disguise. His mind drifted to Clara, the young woman whose discomfort had stood out amid the indifference. Who was she? Would she be bold enough to challenge the rigid culture of the bank? Kennedy didn't know, but he felt certain their paths would cross again. Inside the bank, Clara sat at her desk, her hands trembling slightly as she sorted through paperwork. The encounter with the man at the counter lingered in her mind. He had been calm, dignified, despite the rejection, and it unsettled her. Marilyn and the other staff had already moved on, dismissing the incident with laughter. "Can you believe that guy?" Marilyn said to a colleague, her voice carrying across the room. "Thinking he could open an account with $20. Her colleague smirked, adding, "I'm surprised he didn't try to pay with loose change." Clara bit her lip, forcing herself to stay silent. Their mockery grated on her, not just because it was cruel, but because it clashed with the values she held dear, treating everyone with dignity, no matter their circumstances. She had joined the bank, hoping to make a difference, but the reality of First Summit was far different. It was a place where wealth dictated worth, and appearances trumped humanity. As the day dragged on, Clara's thoughts kept returning to the man. Why had he chosen their bank? There were other places, credit unions, community banks, that might have treated him with more respect. And why had she done nothing to help? The guilt gnawed at her, a reminder of the gap between who she wanted to be and who she had been in that moment. During her lunch break, she stepped outside, hoping the fresh air would clear her mind. She wandered toward the park across the street, her gaze scanning the area almost unconsciously. Then she saw him, the same disheveled figure seated on a bench, his posture relaxed, but his eyes alert as he watched the world go by. Her heart skipped a beat. She hesitated, glancing back at the bank's towering facade, a symbol of the rules she was expected to follow. but something inside her pushed her forward. Taking a deep breath, Clara approached the bench, her steps tentative. "Excuse me?" she said softly, stopping a few feet away. Kennedy looked up, his expression neutral, but curious. I wanted to apologize for what happened in there," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It wasn't right the way you were treated." Kennedy studied her for a moment, his sharp eyes taking in her sincerity. "You work there, don't you?" he asked, nodding toward the bank. Clara nodded, her cheeks flushing. "Yes, but I'm just a trainee. I don't have much say in how things are run." Kennedy's lips curved into a faint smile. "But you came out here anyway," he said, his tone thoughtful. "That says something." Clara shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. "I guess I just wanted to say that not everyone there thinks the way they do," she said finally. "I don't know if it matters, but I think everyone deserves a chance, no matter what they look like." "It matters," Kennedy said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made Clara pause. He gestured to the empty spot on the bench beside him. "Why don't you sit for a minute?" Clara hesitated, glancing back at the bank, but something about his calm demeanor reassured her. She sat down, her nerves easing slightly. They sat in silence for a moment before Kennedy spoke again. "Why do you work there?" he asked, his tone casual but probing. Clara blinked, surprised by the question. "I've always wanted to work in finance," she said, choosing her words carefully. "I thought it would be a way to help people, to make a difference. But it's not what I expected." Kennedy nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It rarely is," he said softly. Clara glanced at him, her curiosity growing. "If you don't mind me asking," she said tentatively, "why did you come to our bank? There are places that might have treated you better." Kennedy leaned back, his eyes scanning the horizon. Sometimes, he said, his voice low and measured, the best way to see people's true colors is to strip away their expectations. Clara frowned, puzzled by his cryptic response. But before she could ask more, he stood up. "Thank you, Clara," he said, his tone warm, "for seeing me." He turned and walked away, leaving her staring after him, her mind racing with questions. Who was this man really? And why did she feel like their brief encounter had set something in motion? As she returned to the bank, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she had just crossed paths with someone extraordinary. Back at her desk, she overheard Marilyn recounting the incident to another staff member, her tone dripping with disdain. "He really thought he could just walk in here and open an account with $20, Marilyn said, shaking her head. The nerve! Clara clenched her jaw, her resolve hardening. She didn't know who the man was, but she knew one thing for certain: she wouldn't stand by silently the next time he returned. The next day, Kennedy returned to the park bench, and Clara, still moved by their first meeting, approached him on her lunch break, offering to help him open a bank account. Inside, she used her employee privileges to waive the minimum deposit, despite the risk. Marilyn noticed and questioned her, but Clara stood firm, completing the process and handing Kennedy his receipt. He thanked her, leaving behind a folded note that read, "Your actions today won't be forgotten." Clara pocketed it, sensing this was only the beginning. The following morning dawned bright and clear over Beverly Hills, the sun filtering through the palm fronds like liquid gold, casting long shadows on the manicured streets. Clara arrived at First Summit Bank with a lingering sense of unease, the events of the previous day replaying in her mind like a vivid dream. She had taken a risk by opening that account, waiving the minimum deposit against protocol, and now the note in her pocket felt like a talisman, mysterious and heavy with unspoken promise. As she settled at her desk, organizing files with mechanical precision, her eyes kept drifting to the entrance, half expecting the disheveled man to reappear. The bank buzzed with its usual rhythm clients in designer attire, discussing investments over polished counters, staff exchanging clipped pleasantries, the air scented with fresh coffee and subtle perfumes. Marilyn, ever the sentinel at reception, handled calls with her trademark efficiency, her voice a blend of honey and steel. But Clara's thoughts were elsewhere, tangled in the enigma of the man who had challenged the bank's unwritten rules simply by existing. Mid-morning, the glass doors swung open, and there he was, John Kennedy still in his tattered disguise, his baseball cap casting shadows over his keen eyes. He moved with the same unhurried confidence, ignoring the sidelong glances from patrons and staff alike. Clara's heart quickened as he approached her desk, a small stack of bills clutched in his hand. "Good morning," he said, his voice low and steady, that softened southern drawl adding a layer of warmth to his words. "I'd like to make a deposit." Clara nodded, glancing around to ensure no one was paying too close attention. Marilyn was occupied with a client, but Clara knew suspicions could flare at any moment. She processed the transaction quickly, a modest $200, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "There you go," she said, handing him the receipt with a tentative smile. "You're building something here." Kennedy's eyes met hers, a flicker of amusement in their depths. "We all are, aren't we?" he replied cryptically, pocketing the slip. Before she could respond, he leaned in slightly. "Thank you again for yesterday. Not many would have done what you did." Clara felt a flush rise to her cheeks, but she held his gaze. It was nothing, she murmured. "Just right." Kennedy nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Right is rarely nothing," he said softly. "It's the foundation of everything worthwhile." With that he turned and left, leaving Clara to ponder his words amid the hum of the bank. The rest of her day passed in a blur, her tasks feeling mundane against the backdrop of their brief exchange. That evening, as she walked home through the twilight streets, the city's lights twinkling like distant stars, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she had glimpsed something profound in the man's quiet wisdom. He wasn't just a down-on-his-luck stranger. There was depth there, a reservoir of insight that belied his appearance. The pattern continued over the next few days. Kennedy returned each morning, his deposits small but consistent. $50 one day, $100 the next, each time engaging Clara in short, meaningful conversations. He spoke of perseverance, drawing from stories that seemed drawn from a life rich with experience. "Life's like a long road," he said one day, sliding a few bills across her desk. "Full of bumps and turns, but it's how you navigate them that defines you. I've seen folks rise from nothing because they refused to let others define their path." Clara listened intently, her initial wariness giving way to genuine interest. His words resonated with her own frustrations, the bank's rigid hierarchy, the way it prioritized profit over people. "That sounds like something from a book," she replied, once processing his deposit. "Or maybe from someone who's walked that road." Kennedy chuckled softly, a sound that carried a hint of humility. "Books are fine, but real life teaches the best lessons. It's about standing firm in what you believe even when the wind's against you." As their interactions deepened, Clara found herself sharing more. One afternoon, after a particularly busy rush, she confided in him during a quiet moment. "I came here thinking finance could help bridge gaps," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Make things fairer for everyone. But it's all about who has the most, isn't it?" Kennedy's eyes softened, his disguise unable to hide the empathy in his gaze. "Fairness isn't given. It's fought for," he replied. "I've known people who changed systems by starting small, questioning the status quo one step at a time. You have that spark, Clara. Don't let this place dim it." His encouragement felt like a lifeline, pulling her from the monotony of her trainee role. Marilyn, however, grew increasingly suspicious. She cornered Clara after one of Kennedy's visits, her arms crossed. "That man's been here every day," she said sharply. "What's his deal?" "We're not running a charity." Clara straightened her voice steady. "He's a client now, paying his way just like anyone else." Marilyn's eyes narrowed, but she backed off, though Clara knew the scrutiny would only intensify. Their conversation spilled beyond the bank's walls. One evening after her shift, Clara spotted Kennedy on the park bench again, his figure silhouetted against the setting sun. She approached hesitantly, but he greeted her with a warm nod. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. "Not at all," he replied, shifting to make room. They sat in companionable silence, at first the park alive with joggers and dog walkers, the distant hum of traffic, a soothing backdrop. Then Kennedy spoke, his voice reflective. "You ever wonder why society builds walls instead of bridges?" Clara nodded, hugging her knees. "All the time, especially in places like the bank. It's like, if you don't look the part, you don't matter." Kennedy leaned back, his eyes on the horizon. "I've spent years observing that. Walls keep some in and others out, but they also blind us to shared humanity. Breaking them starts with seeing beyond appearances, with acts of kindness that defy expectation." Emboldened, Clara opened up about her dreams, a financial system where access wasn't a privilege but a right, where community banks empowered the underserved rather than exploiting them. "It's naive, I know," she admitted. "But I want to be part of something that lifts people up." Kennedy listened without interruption, his nods encouraging. "Naive. No visionary," he said firmly. "I've known leaders who started with dreams like yours. They faced resistance, doubt, but their resilience turned ideas into reality. Tell me more. What would that system look like to you?" Clara described her vision: inclusive, policies, technology, that democratized banking, training programs, focused on empathy over sales. Kennedy shared anecdotes in return tales of ethical triumphs drawn from his own principled life, though he veiled them in generality. "Once I knew a man who stood against corruption in high places," he said. "He lost allies, but gained integrity. That's the true currency worth more than gold." Their meetings became a ritual bench-side discussions, under the stars, walks through the park, where Kennedy's wisdom unfolded like layers of an onion. He spoke of ethical governance, the importance of public service, drawing from his senatorial experiences without revealing his identity. "Power should serve, not rule," he told her one night, the city lights twinkling below. "I've seen too many. Forget that." Clara, inspired, began assisting him more boldly at the bank, slipping him information on better accounts, even suggesting ways to grow his modest savings. Colleagues whispered, Marilyn's glares intensified, but Clara's confidence grew. "Why risk it for him?" a co-worker asked once. "Because it's right," Clara replied simply. Kennedy, sensing her growth, guided her subtly. "You're discovering your strength," he said during a late evening talk. "Use it to challenge what's broken." Clara shared a story from her childhood, watching her family struggle with unfair loans, and Kennedy responded with a tale of advocacy emphasizing resilience. "Adversity forges character," he said, "and character changes worlds." As days turned to weeks, their bond strengthened, Clara evolving from a hesitant trainee to someone ready to act. Little did she know, Kennedy's experiment was yielding its greatest reward, not just exposing flaws, but nurturing potential in an unexpected ally. One crisp afternoon, Kennedy arrived with a larger deposit, $500, his eyes twinkling with purpose. "Building trust takes time," he told Clara as she processed it. "But once it's there, mountains move." She nodded, feeling the truth in his words. That evening in the park, he posed a question. What if you could redesign banking from the ground up? Clara's ideas poured out, and Kennedy listened, his mind already envisioning her role in greater things. The stage was set for revelation, their relationship a testament to the power of genuine connection in a world of superficial judgments. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm amber glow over the bustling streets of Beverly Hills, where the day's energy began to wind down into evening tranquility. Inside First Summit Bank, the atmosphere was a mix of routine closure staff, tallying transactions, clients wrapping up their affairs with satisfied nods. Clara sat at her desk, her fingers absently tapping the keyboard as she processed the last few entries. Her mind, however, was far from the numbers. It wandered back to the enigmatic man whose visits had become the highlight of her days. His wisdom, delivered in quiet, measured tones, had chipped away at her doubts, replacing them with a burgeoning sense of possibility. The note he had left her, "Your actions today won't be forgotten," tucked safely in her drawer, felt like a promise of something greater. As the clock ticked toward closing time, the glass doors parted once more and a figure stepped in, drawing immediate attention. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, the fabric crisp and dark, accentuating his tall, wiry frame. His beard was gone, revealing a clean-shaven face with sharp features, and his hair was neatly combed, exuding an air of undeniable authority. The lobby fell into a hushed murmur as eyes turned toward him, clients pausing mid-conversation, staff freezing in their tasks. Clara's breath caught in her throat. It was him, the man she had come to know, but transformed beyond recognition. John Kennedy strode forward with purposeful steps, his presence commanding the room like a force of nature. Marilyn at the reception desk straightened up, her usual composure cracking under the intensity of his gaze. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice a touch unsteady. "How may I assist you?" Kennedy's lips quirked into a subtle smile, his southern drawl now full and resonant. "I'd like to speak with the manager. It's a matter of some importance." Moments later, Kennedy was escorted into Mr. Reynolds' office, the door closing with a definitive click that echoed through the tense silence. Clara watched from her desk, her heart racing like a drumbeat in her chest. Whispers erupted around her speculation about the well-dressed stranger, curiosity laced with intrigue. Inside the office, Reynolds gestured to a chair, his expression polite but inquisitive. "Please, have a seat. What brings you here today?" Kennedy sat his posture straight and composed his eyes, locking onto Reynolds with unwavering intensity. "I've been conducting business here for several weeks now," he began, his voice steady and clear. "Though I doubt you'd recognize me from my previous visits." Reynolds leaned forward, confusion etching his features. "I'm afraid I don't recall. Have we met?" Kennedy's smile deepened, carrying a hint of irony. "In a manner of speaking, my name is John Kennedy, United States Senator from Louisiana. For the past few weeks, I've visited your bank in disguise as a homeless man to observe firsthand how institutions like this treat those who appear destitute." Reynolds's face paled, his eyes widening in disbelief as the realization hit him like a wave. "Senator Kennedy, this can't be. You're saying you were the man who—" His voice trailed off, the pieces falling into place. The tattered clothes, the crumpled $20 bill, the repeated visits. Kennedy nodded, his tone firm, but not unkind. "Yes, that was me. I wanted to test the boundaries of perception and humanity in a place built on wealth and privilege. What I encountered was predictable yet profoundly disappointing condescension. Dismissal, a complete lack of empathy from most of your staff." Reynolds shifted uncomfortably, his hands clasping together on the desk. "Senator, I assure you this is an anomaly. Our bank values all clients regardless of." Kennedy raised a hand, silencing him gently but decisively. "Assurances won't change what I experienced." Most turned away, but one person didn't. Clara, your trainee, saw beyond the disguise. Her integrity, compassion, and willingness to act on principle were a beacon in an otherwise dim environment. The air in the office grew thick with tension, Reynolds's mind racing to process the implications. What do you intend to do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kennedy leaned back, his expression resolute. "I'm acquiring First Summit Bank. The process has already begun. The paperwork is in motion, backed by my resources and influence. Under new ownership, we'll overhaul the culture policies that prioritize people over profits, training that emphasizes dignity for all systems designed to include rather than exclude." Reynolds's jaw slackened shock, rendering him momentarily speechless. Acquiring the bank. But that's unprecedented. We can address any concerns internally, work together. Kennedy shook his head. "The time for half measures is past. Your role will be reviewed, but know this change is coming, and it will be thorough." Kennedy rose, extending a hand in a gesture of professional courtesy. Reynolds shook it numbly, his world upended in a single conversation. As Kennedy exited the office, the lobby's murmurs swelled into a cacophony of surprise. He made his way directly to Clara's desk, the room's eyes following his every step. Clara stood her legs, feeling unsteady, her mind a storm of questions. You're Senator John Kennedy," she stammered, the pieces of their conversations clicking into place. His cryptic wisdom, his stories of resilience and ethics. Kennedy nodded, his smile warm and genuine. "Guilty as charged. And you, Clara, have been the unexpected highlight of this experiment. Your kindness, didn't go unnoticed. It changed everything." The staff around them gaped, Marilyn's face a mask of stunned disbelief, others whispering furiously. I don't know what to say," Clara admitted, her voice trembling with emotion. "Say you'll join me," Kennedy replied, his tone earnest. "I'm building a team to revolutionize finance, starting with equity. First Bank, a prototype that embodies fairness and innovation. Your insights, your courage, they're exactly what we need. Full-time, starting now." Clara's thoughts raced the stifling bank environment, her unfulfilled dreams, the spark he had ignited in her. This was her chance to make a real difference, to turn her values into action. Around her colleagues' faces reflected a mix of shock and envy, the air electric with the revelation. "Yes," she said finally, her voice gaining strength as she shook his hand. "I'd be honored." The lobby erupted in hushed exclamations, the moment etching itself into the bank's history. Clara's departure from First Summit was swift, a whirlwind of resignation and goodbyes, amid the bank's transformed atmosphere. Staff now tiptoeing around the impending changes, Reynolds's office, a hub of frantic calls. Kennedy arranged everything seamlessly, and soon Clara found herself in a state-of-the-art office in downtown Los Angeles, the space buzzing with innovation. Sleek desks, holographic displays, teams collaborating on whiteboards filled with diagrams of financial models. "Welcome aboard," Kennedy said, introducing her to the core team, a diverse group of experts in technology policy and community development. Equity. First Bank isn't just a bank. It's a movement. We'll start by revitalizing community institutions across the U.S., integrating tech for accessibility and policies rooted in empathy. Clara's role crystallized quickly, leading the overhaul of select community banks, beginning with one in an underserved neighborhood. The contrast was stark. The modest building with peeling paint, harried staff juggling outdated systems, clients desperate for fair treatment. Clara immersed herself, drawing on her experiences. "We need to see people first," she told the team during their first meeting, Kennedy nodding approvingly. They implemented digital platforms for easy access, AI-driven financial advice tailored to low-income users and workshops on empathy and service. Kennedy guided her through hurdles, bureaucratic, red tape skepticism from local leaders. Persistence wins, the day he advised during a late-night strategy session, the city lights twinkling outside. "I've faced tougher battles in the Senate. This is about real change." Challenges mounted as word spread. Traditional financial giants pushed back launching campaigns, questioning the model's viability, calling it idealistic folly. Clara felt the pressure, but Kennedy's steadfast support bolstered her. "They're afraid because we're proving a better way," he said, sharing stories from his career of standing against entrenched interests. Their first revamped bank opened to acclaim clients flocking in media, highlighting success stories of empowered families. Clara stood in the lobby on opening day, watching a single mother open her first account with dignity, tears in her eyes. "This is what matters," Kennedy said beside her, his voice filled with pride. As projects expanded to more U.S. locations, facing regulatory obstacles and competitive sabotage, Clara grew into her leadership, her journey from trainee to trailblazer, a powerful narrative of transformation. The revelation had sparked a revolution, one bank at a time, under Kennedy's visionary guidance. The world beyond America's borders beckoned like an uncharted horizon, vast and full of untapped potential, where the sun rose over distant lands hungry for change. Clara stood at the helm of Equity First Bank's global expansion, her vision fueled by the successes at home, now ready to ripple outward. Under Senator Kennedy's encouragement, she dreamed big, extending accessible banking to underserved communities in sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia's urban slums, and South America's indigenous villages. "We're not just exporting a model," Kennedy told her during a strategy session in their Los Angeles headquarters, the city skyline glittering like a sea of stars outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. "We're planting seeds of hope that know no boundaries." Clara nodded, her resolve steeling as she assembled a team of international experts, each bringing insights from their homelands to tailor the approach. Her first venture took her to Kenya, where dusty roads wound through rural villages, and millions relied on informal lending that often trapped them in cycles of debt. Partnering with local leaders and fintech innovators, Clara launched a pilot mobile banking unit, solar-powered vans equipped with secure apps for account openings, loans, and financial literacy workshops. The air hummed with excitement on launch day, villagers gathering under acacia trees, their faces etched with cautious optimism. Clara met Aisha, a determined farmer, whose small plot had sustained her family through sheer grit. "No bank ever came to us," Aisha said, her eyes shining as she signed up for her first formal account. "Now I can save for seeds for my children's school." Clara's heart swelled, the moment a vivid contrast to the sterile opulence of First Summit Bank. Challenges arose swiftly, local regulations tangled like vines, skeptical officials fearing foreign disruption. "Build bridges, not walls," Kennedy advised via video call, his voice steady amid the static. "Show them we're partners in progress." Clara negotiated tirelessly, her empathy winning allies, and the program flourished, empowering thousands. Emboldened, the expansion surged to Southeast Asia, where humid streets teemed with life in bustling markets. In Indonesia's crowded kampongs, Clara introduced micro-lending apps integrated with community cooperatives, allowing street vendors to access capital without predatory rates. Resistance flared from established banks, their lobbyists spreading doubts like shadows. "They call us dreamers," Clara confided to Kennedy during a late-night debrief, frustration edging her voice. He leaned into the camera, his expression firm. "Dreamers built empires. Stay the course. Integrity outlasts opposition." With his guidance, Clara forged alliances, training local staff in compassionate service, turning skeptics into advocates. Success stories poured in: a young entrepreneur expanding her food stall, a family escaping debt's grip. The model's adaptability shone, blending tech with cultural sensitivity. Further afield in South America's remote highlands, Clara confronted rugged terrains and deep-rooted mistrust. Indigenous communities, long marginalized, viewed banks as distant threats. Equity First adapted, creating bilingual platforms, honoring native languages, partnering with tribal elders for trust-building ceremonies. "This isn't conquest, it's collaboration," Clara emphasized in meetings, her words echoing Kennedy's principles. Hurdles mounted: supply chain delays for equipment, cultural clashes over digital adoption. Yet Kennedy's mentorship proved invaluable. "Resilience isn't born, it's forged in fire," he said, sharing tales from his senatorial battles against inequality. Clara persevered, witnessing transformations: a weaver securing a loan for looms, a village cooperative thriving. By year's end, branches dotted over 20 countries each, a beacon of inclusion from Africa's savannas to Asia's megacities. As Clara stood on a Nairobi balcony one evening, the city's vibrant pulse below, she reflected on the journey. What began as a small act of kindness in a Beverly Hills bank had blossomed into a global movement. Kennedy joined her virtually, his face on her screen, warm with pride. "You've changed lives, Clara. But remember, this is about legacy." Tears welled as she nodded, the weight of their impact sinking in. The experiment had taught profound lessons: treating everyone with fairness, regardless of appearance, could alter destinies. A single compassionate act rippled outward, inspiring waves of change. And building humane systems fostered equality, turning exclusion into opportunity. These truths weren't just stories, they were calls to action. In everyday life, challenge biases, extend kindness to strangers, question unjust structures. By doing so, anyone could spark transformation, creating a world where dignity prevailed. Clara's path, guided by Kennedy's vision, proved that one person's integrity could ignite a revolution, urging all to embrace empathy and drive positive societal shifts.